It was all supposed to be so easy. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a progressive icon with millions of followers, had been invited to testify before a Senate committee. She had friendly Democrats on the panel, adoring activists in the gallery, and full national media coverage. The perfect platform to promote her vision of economic justice. She delivered a fiery opening statement, attacking corporate welfare, mocking conservative senators, and celebrating her own track record. The room erupted in applause. She was winning. Then, Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana asked a simple question. Didn't Amazon promise 25,000 jobs to your district? It seemed like a harmless question, just a basic fact check. But then, something in AOC's face changed. There was a flash of panic. And Kennedy, the unassuming senator with a country accent, noticed it. What happened next would shock everyone in that room. With question after question and document after document, Kennedy methodically exposed a record that just didn't match her rhetoric. He brought up Tesla, the Met Gala, January 6th, and the Green New Deal. Each one of her answers only made things worse. 15 minutes later, AOC stormed out, calling the whole thing a witch hunt. But the cameras caught everything, and the internet would make sure no one ever forgot. On the afternoon of March 15, 2025, the Senate hearing room was filled with that special kind of tension you only get right before political theater. C-SPAN cameras were set up at 3 different angles, their red lights glowing like little warning beacons. The gallery was packed, with progressive activists in the front rows, their "Tax the Rich" buttons gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Journalists were crammed shoulder to shoulder in the back, their fingers poised over their laptop keyboards. The Senate Committee on Oversight and Economic Development had gathered for what should have been a straightforward hearing on how state tax incentives impact job creation. It was the kind of dry topic that would normally draw a half-empty room and some drowsy media coverage. But today was different. Today, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had been invited to speak as an expert witness. At the dais, the senators settled into their big leather chairs. On the Democratic side, they looked pleased, maybe even a little smug. They had carefully orchestrated this invitation, giving their rising star a national platform to promote progressive economic policy. Meanwhile, on the Republican side, most senators wore looks of polite resignation, probably already drafting counterstatements for the evening news. All of them except for one. Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana sat at the far end of the Republican side, almost hidden from the cameras. At 74, he was an unassuming figure with reading glasses perched on his nose, a yellow legal pad covered in careful handwriting, and a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He wore a navy suit that had clearly seen better days, and a tie his wife probably picked out for him 15 years ago. He looked like someone's kindly grandfather, maybe a retired insurance salesman or a small-town pharmacist. And that was exactly the point. You see, Kennedy had built his entire career on being underestimated. His Louisiana drawl was thick as molasses, and his folksy, disarming demeanor made his questions seem almost naive. But then, with surgical precision, he would dismantle witnesses with facts they couldn't possibly refute, and logic they had no way of escaping. His colleagues had a name for it: the Louisiana smile. You wouldn't even realize you'd been cut until you saw the blood. The chamber doors opened, and the murmur of conversation died down. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez entered as if she were walking onto a stage, which, in a way, she was. At 35 years old, she had mastered the art of political performance. The cameras loved her. Social media loved her. Her millions of followers hung on her every tweet, every Instagram video, and every single viral moment. She was wearing a burgundy suit that likely cost more than what most of her constituents paid for their monthly rent. Her hair was perfectly styled, and her posture just radiated confidence. She took her seat at the witness table, adjusted the microphone, and smiled at the friendly faces on the Democratic side of the dais. Senator Warren gave her an encouraging nod. Senator Sanders, her political godfather, looked on, pleased. Committee Chairman Roberts, a moderate Democrat from Connecticut, called the hearing to order. The committee will come to order. We are honored today to welcome Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York's 10th Congressional District to share her insights on progressive economic development strategies. Ocasio-Cortez leaned into the microphone. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm grateful for this opportunity. What followed was vintage AOC, a 20-minute opening statement delivered with the passion of a revival preacher and the confidence of someone who has never been truly challenged. She spoke without any notes, her voice rising and falling in a practiced, steady rhythm. For too long, she began, we've watched states and cities grovel at the feet of corporate America. They offer billions in tax breaks and subsidies in what can only be described as legalized bribery, all for the empty promise of job creation. Her voice grew stronger. We've watched billionaires play states against each other like chess pieces, extracting every possible concession while workers struggle to afford rent, while schools crumble, and while infrastructure fails. And we're told this is just how the game is played, that we have no choice, that we must bow to corporate power or be left behind. She paused for effect, her eyes sweeping the room. Well, I'm here to tell you we have a choice, and some of us have made it. The progressive activists in the gallery murmured their approval. In my district, we faced this exact scenario. Amazon, one of the richest corporations in human history, owned by the richest man in the world, demanded nearly $3 billion in tax incentives to build their headquarters in Queens. $3 billion that could have gone to schools, to hospitals, to infrastructure. And when we said no, when we stood up to corporate greed, we were told we were foolish. We were told we'd killed jobs. We were told we didn't understand economics. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to an intimate, conspiratorial tone. Well, let me tell you what happened. Amazon came to New York anyway, without the tax breaks, without the corporate welfare, because they needed us more than we needed them. And we saved billions of dollars that can now go to the people who actually need it. The activists applauded. Chairman Roberts made a half-hearted attempt to gavel them into silence. This is the model we need across America, AOC continued. No more corporate welfare, no more billionaire handouts, no more using our tax dollars to line the pockets of the wealthy while working people suffer. Then her tone shifted, becoming almost mocking. Now, I know some senators here might not understand this. Some senators, particularly from certain southern states that have made a business model out of corporate welfare, might think this approach is crazy. They might think, to borrow a phrase, that you can land on the sun if you go at night. A few people in the gallery laughed. Kennedy's smile didn't waver, though anyone watching closely would have noticed his pen pause for just a moment on his legal pad. These same senators, AOC continued, warming to her theme, represent states where oil companies write the laws, where workers have no rights, where environmental protections are a joke. They take corporate donations by the truckload and then lecture us about fiscal responsibility. Well, the American people are tired of it. They're tired of being sold out. They're tired of senators who work for ExxonMobil instead of for them. She sat back, her closing line delivered with complete confidence. It's time we stopped letting corporations dictate our economic policy. It's time we put people over profits. Thank you." The progressive half of the gallery erupted in applause. Chairman Roberts let it go on for a few seconds. This was, after all, good television, before gaveling them to order. "Thank you, Representative Ocasio-Cortez. We'll now begin questions from committee members. We'll use the standard 5-minute rule." Senator Kennedy. Kennedy had been methodically underlining sections of his notes throughout AOC's statement. Now, he slowly removed his reading glasses and set them on the table in front of him. He took a sip of water. He cleared his throat. He looked at AOC with the same gentle expression a grandfather might use when about to explain to a child why jumping off the roof wouldn't work out well. "Well now, Congresswoman," he began, his Louisiana drawl as thick and slow as honey. "That was quite a performance. Reminded me of a mockingbird we had back home. Lots of noise early in the morning. Very passionate. But I always wondered if there was any substance behind all that chirping." A few nervous laughs rippled through the room. AOC's smile tightened slightly. "You've had your say, and you said it beautifully," Kennedy continued. "Very inspiring. Almost made me want to join a protest. But if the chairman permits, I'd like to ask the Congresswoman a few questions about this remarkable record of economic leadership she's so proud of." Chairman Roberts nodded, already looking like he regretted the entire hearing. "The senator is recognized." Kennedy leaned back in his chair, the very picture of casual interest. "Now, Congresswoman, you mentioned corporate welfare. You're very passionate about it. I appreciate passion, but let's talk about your track record on jobs, shall we? Because I have been doing some reading, and I have to tell you, I'm a little confused." He put his reading glasses back on and picked up a document. "You mentioned Amazon. All right, let's start there. You're famous for opposing Amazon's HQ2 in New York City. Is that right?" AOC nodded, her confidence unshaken. "That's right, Senator, and I stand by that decision." "Oh, I can tell you're proud," Kennedy replied with a friendly tone. "You wore that pride like a badge of honor. You tweeted about it, gave interviews, and really celebrated it as a win. Now help me understand something here. And listen, I'm just a simple country lawyer, so correct me if I'm missing something. But didn't Amazon promise something like 25,000 to 40,000 jobs in Queens?" "They made promises," AOC replied dismissively. "Corporations are always making promises." "That they do," Kennedy agreed. "They certainly do. But let's get into the specifics, because I happen to have the actual agreement that was on the table right here." He held up a thick stack of papers. According to this document, Amazon committed to creating 25,000 jobs, with an average salary of around $150,000. That works out to $3.75 billion in yearly salaries. The economic impact study, which was ordered by New York State, not Amazon, projected a total economic benefit of $27.5 billion over 25 years. He put the document down and looked at AOC over the rim of his glasses. "Now, Congresswoman, that sounds like a whole lot of money for Queens, for your district. So help me understand why that was a bad thing for the people you represent." AOC shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Senator, you're boiling a complex issue down to a few simple points. We had serious concerns about gentrification and the impact it would have on our local communities." "Oh, I'm sure I'm oversimplifying," Kennedy cut in softly. "It's one of my many flaws. But let's just stick with the simple stuff for a minute, because I'm still trying to wrap my head around the numbers. You said New York was planning to give away $3 billion in tax breaks. That was the term you used, wasn't it? Giving away billions." "That is correct. Kennedy just smiled. You see, this is where things get a little fuzzy for me. Those weren't breaks on taxes New York was already collecting. They were tax breaks on future taxes Amazon would pay from revenue they were going to create. That's revenue that wouldn't have even existed if they hadn't come. So New York wasn't really giving away any money at all. They were simply agreeing to take a smaller piece of a brand new pie. You can't just give away something you don't actually have. That'd be like me offering you a piece of the moon for free. I don't own the moon, so it wouldn't be a very generous offer, would it? A few chuckles could be heard from the Republican side of the room. AOC's jaw clenched. The point, she said, her voice turning sharp, is that we shouldn't have to bribe corporations. Oh, I couldn't agree more, Kennedy said cheerfully. No bribes. Absolutely not. So, let me ask you this then. After you killed the Amazon deal, and killed really is the right word, isn't it? Since the deal was dead, what happened next? Amazon opened an office in New York anyway, AOC shot back triumphantly, as if she'd been waiting for that exact question. They did it without the tax breaks, just like I said they would. They certainly did. Kennedy nodded along. Opened an office in Manhattan, not in Queens. And it was about 1,500 jobs, not 25,000. And let me just get this straight. Those 1,500 jobs, they aren't in your district, are they? Silence, Congresswoman. Kennedy's voice was still soft, but now there was an edge to it. Are those 1,500 jobs located in your district? No, AOC admitted. They're in Manhattan. So, let me see if I'm following the math here, because I want to make absolutely sure I haven't missed anything. Kennedy then pulled out a calculator, an actual physical calculator, which several reporters later called a power move, and made a show of punching in the numbers. You turned down 25,000 jobs for your district, and you ended up with 1,500 jobs outside of your district. That's a net loss of 23,500 jobs. You turned down an average salary of $150,000. Those 1,500 Manhattan jobs likely pay about the same amount. So that adds up to roughly $225 million in yearly wages for New York City, compared to the $3.75 billion you could have had. That is a loss of over $3.5 billion in annual wages. He looked up from his calculator. Congresswoman, down in Louisiana, we'd call that a pretty bad deal. What do you all call that in New York? I call it standing up to corporate greed. AOC shot back, her voice rising with defiance. I call it refusing to be blackmailed. But Amazon still came, didn't they? Kennedy interrupted, his voice still perfectly calm. They wanted to be in New York so badly that they came anyway, without any of the incentives. Which means you held all the cards, and you just threw them away. You could have negotiated an even better deal for your community. You could have pushed for more community benefits, more local hiring, and more commitments to affordable housing. But instead, you killed 25,000 jobs and took a victory lap. He paused, letting the silence hang in the air. Meanwhile, Arlington, Virginia, got their piece of HQ too, and now they're thriving. Those jobs are real. Those paychecks are real. And that tax revenue is flowing into Virginia, not New York. AOC's face was flushed with anger. Oh, I'm sure it is, Kennedy said sympathetically. I'm sure you have a very complicated explanation that makes perfect sense to you, but here's the part I just can't wrap my head around. You said that corporations should show up without any incentives. Amazon did exactly that. They came to New York without incentives, but then they only created 500 jobs instead of the full 25,000. So that means the incentives would have created an additional 23,500 jobs. Doesn't that mean the incentives actually worked? The logic trap was perfect, and you could tell everyone in the room saw it. If AOC argued that Amazon would have created all 25,000 jobs without incentives, she'd then have to explain why they only created 1,500. If she argued the 25,000 jobs were never real to begin with, she'd completely undermine her own complaint. And if she admitted that the incentives would have led to more jobs, she'd have to admit that she was wrong. She chose to get angry. Senator, this is the exact kind of corporate pandering that has destroyed working-class America. You're carrying water for billionaires. Congresswoman, Kennedy interrupted, and for the first time, you could hear an edge in his voice. I'm not carrying water for anyone. I'm asking about the 25,000 people in your district who could have had jobs but now don't. I'm asking about the schools that could have been funded with $10 billion in new tax revenue, but now won't be. I'm asking why you're taking a victory lap for leaving your own constituents worse off. He picked up another document. And while we're on the subject of your district, let's talk about where you live, shall we? What does where I live have to do with— Well, you mentioned gentrification, Kennedy said pleasantly. You said you were worried about gentrification in Queens if Amazon came to town. That's a perfectly valid concern. Gentrification pushes out working-class people when wealthy folks move in and drive all the prices up. So, I did a little research on your residence. He held up what looked like a real estate listing. You live at the Navy Yard building in Washington, D.C., is that correct? AOC hesitated. My D.C. residence? Yes, tell us about this building, Congresswoman, for those of us who might not be familiar with it. It's an apartment building. Oh, it's a little more than that, Kennedy said, reading from the listing. It's a luxury apartment complex where studio apartments start at $2,000 a month. Amenities include, and I'm reading this directly from their website, a climbing wall, several pools, racquetball courts, a golf simulator, a rooftop dog park, a steam room, multiple cycling studios, 2 kinds of massage rooms and charging ports for electric vehicles. He looked up. That's quite a place. A golf simulator, massage rooms, a rooftop dog park. Sounds lovely. Must be nice. I fail to see what my apartment— I'm getting to that. Kennedy said, You see, you talk a lot about billionaires and the rich, and how they don't need any more benefits. You wear dresses that say, tax the rich, to fancy galas. You tweet about income inequality. But you live in a building that has a rooftop dog park and a golf simulator. You shop at Whole Foods, which is owned by Amazon, the very company whose jobs you killed. And you park your Tesla, made by the billionaire Elon Musk, whom you regularly criticize, illegally in the fire lane because you can't be bothered to walk from a legal parking spot. The room had fallen completely silent. Even the activists in the gallery looked stunned. Do you see the hypocrisy here, Congresswoman? Kennedy asked, his voice becoming almost gentle again. You live like the rich while you're demonizing them. You shop at businesses owned by billionaires while you attack corporate America. You drive a $59,000 car while pushing for a Green New Deal that would make cars unaffordable for most working people. You're a socialist with a luxury lifestyle. AOC's voice was shaking now, though it was hard to tell if it was from anger or something else. This is a personal attack. You're attacking me personally instead of addressing— I'm not attacking you personally, Kennedy said firmly. I'm pointing out that your lifestyle completely contradicts your politics. There's a word for that, Congresswoman. It starts with H, and it rhymes with hypocrisy. Can you guess what it is? This is outrageous. What's outrageous? Kennedy's voice started to rise for the first time, is that you lecture working people about making sacrifices while you live in luxury. What's outrageous is that you killed 25,000 jobs and you call it a victory. Oh. What's outrageous is that you came here today to insult my intelligence, my state, and my constituents, and you honestly thought no one was going to push back. He leaned forward. Well, Congresswoman, someone is pushing back, and we're just getting started. Chairman Roberts tried to restore order, but Kennedy was already on a roll and building his momentum. Let's talk about that Tesla, since we brought it up, Kennedy said, as he shuffled through his papers. Back in 2018, you were at a town hall with Senator Sanders, a climate change town hall. Very serious stuff. And you were asked about Tesla. Do you remember what you said? AOC's eyes narrowed. I've said many things about many companies. Oh, this one was memorable, Kennedy assured her. You said, and I'm quoting directly here, for far too long we gave money to Tesla. We gave money to a ton of people, and we got no return on our investment that the public made in creating technologies. You said it was time we get our due, because it's the public that funded and financed a lot of innovative technologies. He set down that paper and picked up another. That was October 2018. 2 years later, in October 2010, you told Vanity Fair magazine that you had just gotten a car, an electric vehicle. You said because of CO, you didn't want to take the train anymore. Kennedy looked at her with exaggerated confusion. Now, Congresswoman, help me out here. You attacked Tesla for taking public money. You said the company owed the public. You criticized them specifically by name. Then you bought a Tesla, a $59,000 Tesla Model 3 to be specific. Does that seem consistent to you? I needed reliable transportation to travel between New York and D.C. during a pandemic, AOC said defensively. At the time, Tesla was the only electric vehicle that could make that trip on a single charge. Oh, I don't question that it's a fine automobile, Kennedy said genially. I hear they're excellent cars. What I question is the principle. You attack a company, then you give them your money. You criticize corporate subsidies, then you buy from a company that benefited from those subsidies. You demonize billionaires, then you help make Elon Musk richer. He flipped to another page. And speaking of billionaires, let's talk about that dress. What dress? You know what dress, Congresswoman. The dress. The one that broke the internet. September 13th, 2021, at the Met Gala. AOC shifted uncomfortably. I was invited to attend. Oh, you certainly were, Kennedy nodded. Invited to the Met Gala, where tickets cost $35,000 each, where tables cost upward of $200,000, where the wealthiest celebrities in America gather to celebrate. Well, to celebrate being wealthy celebrities mostly, and you wore a custom dress designed by Aurora James that said, "Tax the Rich," in big red letters across the back. He held up a printout of the photo, which had indeed broken the internet. AOC in a flowing white gown, the words "Tax the Rich" emblazoned across it, surrounded by billionaires and celebrities. Now, I'll admit, it was a statement, Kennedy said. Quite a statement, but help me understand it because I'm confused. You went to a $35,000 per ticket event, surrounded by the richest people in America, wearing a dress that costs tens of thousands of dollars with professional hair and makeup done at the Carlyle Hotel, one of the most expensive hotels in New York, to tell rich people they should pay more taxes. It was making a statement at the heart of the establishment, AOC said, sounding like she'd rehearsed the line. It was bringing the message where it needed to be heard. Was it? Kennedy asked. Because it seems to me you were enjoying the benefits of being rich while pretending to oppose richness. You mingled with Kendall Jenner and Anna Wintour. You posed for photographs, You had a wonderful time, by all accounts. And the designer you chose to promote, Brother Veli's, sells shoes for $700 a pair, handbags for $1,500, and a comb for $95. A comb, Congresswoman, for $95. He let that sink in. These are luxury goods for rich people. You wore a Tax the Rich dress to promote a brand that sells to rich people at an event for rich people. That's not making a statement. That's participation. The dress was borrowed, AOC began. Was it? Kennedy pulled out another document. According to the House Ethics Committee investigation that followed, there were questions about whether you improperly accepted gifts for that event. The committee investigated you for potentially violating House rules by accepting permissible gifts associated with your attendance at the Met Gala. Those are the Ethics Committee's words, not mine. He looked at her seriously. Did you violate House ethics rules, Congresswoman? That investigation was politically motivated. That's not what I asked. Did you violate House ethics rules? The matter was resolved. Also, not what I asked. Kennedy's voice was patient, but firm. Simple question. Did you accept gifts that violated House rules? AOC's lawyer instincts, she had once studied to be one, kicked in. I cooperated fully with the Ethics Committee, and the matter is closed. So you're not denying it, Kennedy observed. You're just saying that you got away with it. Is that accurate? I'm saying the Ethics Committee closed the investigation because you settled it, Kennedy said. There's a difference between being found innocent and making an investigation go away. But let's move on, because I'm more interested in the broader pattern here, he said, counting on his fingers. You attack Tesla, then you buy a Tesla. You attack Amazon, and then you shop at Whole Foods, which is owned by Amazon. You attack billionaires, and then you attend their parties. You criticize luxury, and then you live in luxury. You promote the Green New Deal, then spend an incredible $29,000 on ride-share services in 1 year, when your office is literally a 1-minute walk from a subway station. Kennedy leaned back. Congresswoman, in Louisiana, we have an old saying, don't piss on my leg and tell me it's raining. You're asking the American people to believe you're a champion of the working class while you live like the rich. And when we point this out, you claim we're attacking you. We are not attacking you. We're just noticing that you're a hypocrite. The word hung in the air like a thrown knife. AOC's face was now red, her jaw clenched tight. Several reporters were typing furiously. I represent working people, she said, her voice tight. Everything I do is for working people. You represent a district where the median household income is $66,000, Kennedy interrupted. You make $174,000 as a congresswoman, plus book deals, plus speaking fees. You live in a luxury building with a golf simulator. You wear designer clothes to exclusive galas. You drive a car that costs more than many of your constituents make in a year. How exactly are you one of them? Because I came from them, AOC shot back. I was a bartender. You were a bartender 7 years ago, Kennedy said. Now you're part of the elite you claim to oppose, and there's nothing wrong with that. Success is good. Upward mobility is the American dream. But don't pretend you're still tending bar while you're sipping champagne at the Met Gala. Have the courage to admit you've changed. He flipped to a new page on his legal pad. But let's talk about something more serious than your wardrobe and your car. Let's talk about January 6th. The mood in the room shifted. January 6, 2021 was sacred ground in American politics. It was the day protesters stormed the Capitol, the day democracy itself had felt fragile. Kennedy's tone became more somber. January 6th was a dark day for our republic, he began. No question about it. Violence against our institutions, against our people, against our democracy. It was wrong. It was criminal. And the people who engaged in it should be and have been prosecuted. He looked at AOC. But I need to ask you about your account of that day, Congresswoman, because you've told a very dramatic story about your experience, and I have some questions about it. AOC stiffened. I've been very clear about what happened. You have been, Kennedy agreed. Very clear, very detailed, very emotional. On February 1st, 2021, you did a 90-minute Instagram Live video describing your experience. You said you feared for your life. You said you thought you were going to die. You said, and these are your words, I did not think that I was going to make it to the end of that day alive. He paused. That's a powerful statement, very frightening. And I believe you were scared. Fear is real. But I need you to clarify something for me. Where exactly were you? On January 6th, I was in my office. Which office? AOC hesitated. My congressional office. And where is that located? In the Cannon House office building. Kennedy pulled out a map of the Capitol complex and held it up. For those watching who aren't familiar with the Capitol complex, let me explain the geography. The Capitol building itself is the one with the dome. That's where the House and Senate chambers are located. That's where the violence occurred on January 6th. The Cannon House office building is across the street, connected by tunnels but physically separate. He looked at AOC. You were in the Cannon building, correct? Not in the Capitol itself. The Cannon building is part of the Capitol complex. That's not what I asked, Congresswoman. Were you in the Capitol building with the dome where the rioters actually were? No, AOC admitted. But, so when you said you thought you were going to die, you were in a different building than where the rioters actually were. They evacuated our building, AOC said, her voice rising. We didn't know where they were. That's absolutely fair, Kennedy said. You didn't know. In the moment, I'm sure it was terrifying. But after the fact, when you told your story, you knew where you had been, correct? You knew you weren't in the Capitol building itself. I never claimed I was in the Capitol building. You didn't explicitly claim it. That's true, Kennedy acknowledged. But you didn't correct anyone who thought you were either. You told a story designed to make people believe you were in immediate danger from rioters, when in fact, you were in a separate building that was evacuated as a precaution. He riffled through his notes. Let me read from your Instagram video. You claimed a man was banging on your door, shouting, "Where is she? Where is she?" You described him entering your office with intense anger and hostility. You said you hid in the bathroom, convinced you were going to die. You recounted how this man looked at you with so much rage that you truly feared for your life. Kennedy looked up. That man was a Capitol police officer coming to evacuate you to safety, wasn't he? The Congresswoman was silent. That was a Capitol police officer, she admitted. Correct. AOC replied defensively. He didn't identify himself properly. He was shouting. He had this anger in his eyes. He was trying to save your life, Kennedy said, his voice turning hard. He was a Capitol police officer, doing his job under unbelievable circumstances. And you painted him as a threat. You strongly suggested that this officer might have been trying to harm you. Have you ever apologized to that officer? I was just describing my experience. You slandered a police officer who was there to protect you, Kennedy interrupted. You twisted a rescue into a story of a threat for your own political gain. That officer, he probably has a family. He probably has kids who had to listen to their dad be called terrifying and threatening when he was actually being a hero. Have you apologized? By now, AOC's hands were shaking. I was describing how it felt in that moment. But we're not in the moment anymore, Kennedy said. We are 4 years later. You know now what really happened. You know that officer was helping you. You know you were never in the Capitol building itself. You know that no rioters ever entered your hallway. You know all of this. And yet, you keep telling the story as if you barely escaped with your life. He picked up another document. Representative Nancy Mace from South Carolina has an office just 2 doors down from yours. She was also there that day. She tweeted, and I'm quoting here, "My office is 2 doors down from AOC's and no insurrectionist stormed our hallway." She confirmed your building was evacuated, but also that no rioters ever got into your area. So why did she feel the need to correct your story? Everyone experienced that day differently. But facts are facts, Kennedy replied. Either rioters were in your hallway, or they weren't. Representative Mace says they weren't. The security footage shows they weren't. Evacuation records show your building was cleared as a precaution, not because rioters had actually breached it. So why did you tell a story that made it sound like you were in direct danger from the rioters? I was in danger, AOC shouted, her composure finally cracking. We didn't know what was going on. We had no idea where they were. We heard they had guns. We heard they had bombs. And that fear was legitimate, Kennedy said, his tone softening just a bit. I don't question that you were scared. But there is a difference between being scared and being in immediate danger. There's a difference between describing your fear and creating a story that blows the threat way out of proportion. And there is a huge difference between being in a building that was simply evacuated and being in the actual Capitol building, where Officer Brian Sicknick died, where 140 officers were injured, where real violence was happening. He leaned forward. Those officers, the ones who actually faced the rioters, who fought them hand to hand, the ones who actually bled, they don't get Instagram videos with millions of views. They don't get glowing media coverage. They don't get to be called heroes. But you were safe in your office building while they fought. You got to tell a dramatic story about how you nearly died. Don't you think that's disrespectful to the people who truly faced the violence? Tears started to form in AOC's eyes, though it was hard to tell if it was from anger, embarrassment, or real emotion. I shared my truth. Your truth isn't the truth, Kennedy stated bluntly. Your truth is a story you told yourself, and then you told it to the entire country. The real truth is that you were evacuated from a building that was never breached, while brave officers fought real rioters in a completely different building. Your truth is that you described a police officer who was trying to save you as some kind of threat. And your truth is that you used that day, a day when people actually died, to make yourself the center of attention. He let that sink in for a moment before he continued. You even said later on that you feared you would be raped. On CNN, you told Dana Bash that you thought you might be raped that day. Congresswoman, that is a very serious allegation. Do you have any proof at all that anyone tried to rape you or even threatened to? I felt that I was in danger. That is not what I asked. I asked if anyone actually threatened you with rape. No. So you just felt you might be in danger of being raped. And you said that in public, fully aware that no one had really threatened you, knowing your words would grab headlines, and knowing it would solidify this image of you as the victim. Kennedy's tone was soft, yet he was completely relentless. Congresswoman, Do you realize how that cheapens the experience of people who have actually been assaulted? Do you see how you're using the language of sexual violence just to score political points? AOC's lawyer, who was there with her, was whispering frantically in her ear, but she just shook her head. "I stand by every word I said," she declared, her voice tight with emotion. "Of course you do," Kennedy replied with a hint of sadness. "Because to admit you exaggerated would be to admit you used a national tragedy for your own political story. And we just can't have that, can we?" He shut that folder and picked up another. "Now, let's get into your policies. Let's discuss the Green New Deal." "The Green New Deal," Kennedy began, his tone shifting back to that of a professor. "It's your signature piece of legislation, your big idea, the one that's supposed to save America from climate change. So, tell me about it." AOC looked relieved at the change of topic, even though she could feel a trap being set. The Green New Deal is a sweeping plan designed to tackle climate change and create millions of jobs at the same time. And what's the price tag on that? The investment would be significant, but the cost of doing nothing. How much does it cost? "Congresswoman," Kennedy repeated, his voice patient yet firm. "Just a ballpark figure." "Well, estimates really depend on how it's implemented. The number I've seen pop up most often," Kennedy cut in, "is around $93 trillion over 10 years. Over 10 years. Are we in the right ballpark with that? That's an overblown number that critics use. It comes from the American Action Forum, a think tank that actually ran the numbers on your proposal," Kennedy pointed out. "But hey, let's just say they're wrong. Let's say it's only half of that. That's $46.5 trillion over 10 years. Let's say they're way off and it's only a quarter of what they estimated. That still leaves us at $23 trillion. He then pulled out his calculator again. The entire GDP of the United States is roughly $28 trillion a year. So, even with the most conservative estimate, your plan would cost almost the entire economic output of America for a full year. So where is that money supposed to come from? We would raise taxes on the wealthy. How wealthy are we talking? Kennedy pressed. What would the tax rate be? A marginal rate of 70% on any income over $10 million. The Tax Foundation actually ran an analysis on that, Kennedy said as he flipped through some papers. Even if you managed to tax every single dollar over $10 million at 70%, you'd only bring in about $720 billion over 10 years. That's nowhere near $23 trillion. And remember, that's using the lowest possible cost estimate for your plan. So where does the other $22 trillion come from? AOC fell silent. You don't actually know, do you? Kennedy said, his voice softening. You've put forward a plan that would require spending more money than the entire American economy has, and you have absolutely no idea how you're going to pay for it. You just assumed we'd all figure it out later. That's not how you govern, Congresswoman. That's pure fantasy. He then picked up another document. All right, let's get into the details of this plan. Your original resolution called for making every single existing building in the United States energy efficient. Do you have any idea how many buildings there are in the United States? No. About 130 million, Kennedy supplied. Even if you could manage to upgrade each building for just $50,000, which is a ridiculously low number, that's $6.5 billion right there, just for the buildings alone. And you wanted to get all of this done in just 10 years. That breaks down to 13 million buildings a year. That's 35,000 buildings every single day. Every day, for 10 straight years. He looked her straight in the eye. Do you truly grasp how impossible that is? Do you get that we don't have enough contractors or materials or even the time to do a tiny fraction of that. We would mobilize our resources. Mobilize what? Kennedy shot back. A fantasy. This isn't World War II where you can just switch car factories over to making tanks. This is specialized work that requires specialized skills. And even if you could somehow find enough workers, you'd be forcing private property owners to upgrade their own buildings, whether they want to or not. Is that your plan? Government-mandated renovations. The climate crisis demands bold action. Bold and stupid are not the same thing, Kennedy said sharply. Bold would be to invest in nuclear power, which is clean, reliable, and actually up and running. Bold would be to cut the red tape for renewable energy projects. Bold would mean putting forward realistic proposals that could actually work. What you're proposing isn't bold, it's delusional. He wasn't finished. All right, let's switch gears and talk about jobs. You've claimed the Green New Deal would create millions of jobs, yet every single economic analysis shows it would actually wipe out 3 to 5 million existing jobs in sectors like fossil fuels, transportation, and manufacturing. So what's your plan for all of those workers? They would simply transition into green jobs. But would they really? Kennedy pressed. Think about a 55-year-old coal miner from West Virginia who's spent his entire life working underground. You're just going to retrain him to install solar panels? Or what about a 50-year-old truck driver who's been on the road for 30 years? Is he suddenly going to become a wind turbine technician? Do you realize just how condescending that sounds? Do you get that these are real people with real lives, not just pawns on your political chessboard? He then pulled out another stack of papers. Here's what has happened every single place these kinds of policies have been attempted. Germany, for instance, poured $580 billion into their energy transition, and now they're stuck with the highest electricity prices in Europe and still haven't met their emissions goals. Spain's solar subsidies led to a huge boom, which then went completely bust, destroying the very companies and jobs they were meant to create. And California is dealing with rolling blackouts because its power grid simply can't handle the unreliability of renewables. Kennedy then looked directly at AOC. Every single place that has tried what you are proposing has failed. Every single one. So what makes you possibly think America would be any different? But we have to try. No, Kennedy stated firmly. We have to think, we have to plan, and we have to use some common sense. What we don't have to do is wreck our entire economy based on a proposal that looks like it was scribbled on the back of a napkin by someone with zero understanding of basic economics. He then picked up what appeared to be a printout of a social media post. When your office initially released the Green New Deal, the FAQ document, which, by the way, you later deleted, contained some interesting details. It mentioned providing economic security for people who were unwilling to work. That's unwilling, not unable. It also talked about getting rid of air travel entirely within 10 years. It even acknowledged the problem of farting cows and suggested we might actually have to eliminate cattle. Kennedy peered at her over the top of his glasses. Did you personally write that, Congresswoman? That was just an early draft that was published by accident. So was it your plan or not? It was a staff error. So you're telling me your staff just independently decided to propose eliminating air travel and getting rid of all the cows, and you had absolutely no idea? The skepticism in Kennedy's voice was obvious. Or was that your actual plan, right up until people started laughing at it and then you tried to claim it was all just a mistake? AOC's silence was all the answer he needed. You know, here's what I think really happened. Kennedy continued. I think you genuinely believed all of this stuff. I think you honestly thought you could get rid of airplanes, get rid of cattle, and just pay people who don't even want to work. And then, somebody with an ounce of common sense probably told you just how insane that sounded, and you tried to make it all disappear. But, as we know, the internet is forever. And Congresswoman, we remember. He then sat back in his chair. The Green New Deal isn't a serious policy proposal at all. It's a fantasy wish list from someone who clearly doesn't understand how the economy works, how energy works, or frankly, how the real world works. And the very fact that you've built your entire political brand on this tells me everything I need to know about your judgment. Kennedy was relentless now, sensing a win. Since we're on the topic of your policies, let's talk about your ethics. Earlier this year, a group called Americans for Public Trust filed an ethics complaint against you. Are you aware of that complaint? I'm aware of what are clearly politically motivated attacks. This complaint, Kennedy continued, alleges you misused your member representational allowance. That's taxpayer money we're talking about, Congresswoman. It's money that's meant for official duties. The complaint states that you paid $3,700 to someone named Juan D. Gonzalez for training and another $850 to the Bombazo Dance Company, also for training. He then looked at her, waiting for an answer. So, can you explain to us why taxpayer money was used to fund dance lessons? Those were perfectly legitimate office expenses. For what, exactly? Kennedy pressed on. What official congressional purpose could possibly be served by paying a dance company? Were you perhaps training your staff to dance their way through the legislative process? That is a complete mischaracterization. Then characterize it for us correctly, Kennedy said. What precisely was this training for? AOC shot a quick glance at her lawyer, who gave a slight shake of his head. I'm afraid I don't have those specific details in front of me right now. How very convenient, Kennedy observed dryly. You just don't happen to remember why you spent thousands of taxpayer dollars on a dance company. Well, let me suggest a possibility. Is it possible you used that taxpayer money for personal expenses, or maybe for campaign activities, both of which would be a clear violation of federal law? So, is that what happened? No, absolutely not. Then explain the dance lessons. There was only silence. You can't explain it? Kennedy asked. All right then, let's move on to something else you can't seem to explain. Your grandmother. AOC's eyes widened in surprise. My grandmother has absolutely nothing to do with this. Oh, but she does, Kennedy said, his voice turning hard as stone. In June of 2021, you posted pictures of your grandmother's house in Puerto Rico. It had been damaged by Hurricane Maria years before and still had not been repaired. You posted these pictures showing the damage, the blue tarp, and the poor conditions. And you said, and I'm reading from your tweet, just over a month ago, the Biden administration agreed to forgive billions in disaster aid to Puerto Rico. This is what it means. Storms aren't the most dangerous threat to Puerto Ricans. Natural disaster recovery efforts that are gutted leave us vulnerable. He set the printout down. That tweet went viral. Millions of people saw it, and people were outraged at how your grandmother had been abandoned. Except, here is what you didn't mention. FEMA and local Puerto Rican officials confirmed that aid was available for your grandmother. She had declined the assistance. Kennedy let that sink in. Your grandmother refused the help that was offered, and you used her suffering to attack the administration and make a political point. And when people called you out on this, when they started a GoFundMe that raised over $100,000 for your grandmother, you didn't thank them. You didn't accept it. You let other people fix your grandmother's house while you used her pain for Twitter engagement. That's not fair. What's not fair is using your own grandmother as a political prop. Kennedy said harshly. What's not fair is having millions of dollars from your book deals and speaking fees and refusing to help your own family, all while blaming the government. What's not fair is that your grandmother lived in those conditions while you lived in a luxury apartment with a rooftop dog park. He pulled out another set of photos. And speaking of political props, let's talk about the parking lot. What parking lot? You know what parking lot? Kennedy said, referencing June of 2018, before you were even elected. You went to a protest about family separation at the border, and a photographer took pictures of you crying at a fence. The pictures went viral. Everyone shared them. AOC crying at children in cages became a rallying cry. He held up the photos. Except these pictures were taken in a parking lot. There were no detention facilities visible, no children, no cages, just you performing grief in an empty parking lot. The photographer, Yvonne Pierre-Age, later confirmed that you weren't actually at a detention facility. You were at a protest in a parking lot. Kennedy looked at her with something like disgust. You staged a photo op at an empty parking lot and let people believe you were witnessing children in cages. That's not advocacy, Congresswoman. That's theater. That's using other people's suffering as a backdrop for your political career. I was at a legitimate protest. In a parking lot, Kennedy repeated. Not at a detention center. Not witnessing anything. Just performing for cameras. And when people pointed this out, you accused them of spreading misinformation. But it wasn't misinformation. It was the truth. You just didn't like that the truth made you look like a fraud. He gathered his papers. Here's what I see, Congresswoman. I see someone who kills jobs and calls it a victory. I see someone who lives in luxury while preaching socialism. I see someone who exaggerates trauma for political gain. I see someone who proposes trillion-dollar fantasies without any idea how to pay for them. I see someone who uses family members as props. I see someone who stages photo ops and calls it activism. I see someone who misuses taxpayer money for dance lessons. Kennedy leaned forward, his voice dropping. And do you know what the worst part is? Even your own people have abandoned you. The Democratic Socialists of America, your people, the ones who made you, they withdrew their endorsement of you last year. Do you know why? AOC said nothing. Because even they think you've sold out, Kennedy said. Even the socialists think you're not socialist enough. You've managed the impossible. You're too extreme for normal Democrats, and not extreme enough for actual socialists. You're politically homeless, Congresswoman, and it's because you stand for nothing except your own advancement. The hearing room had gone completely silent. Even the activists in the gallery seemed to be stunned. AOC sat at the witness table, her hands gripping the edge so hard that her knuckles were white. Her lawyer was whispering urgently to her, but she didn't seem to be listening. Kennedy slowly took off his reading glasses and set them on the table. He looked at AOC, not with anger, but with something that looked like pity. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, he began, his Louisiana drawl slower than ever. You came here today to lecture us, to tell us how economics should work, to explain how we're all just too old, too Southern, and too stupid to understand modern progressive politics. You insulted my state. You insulted my intelligence. You implied that I was corrupt. He paused. And maybe you thought no one would push back. Maybe you thought you could say whatever you wanted, and everyone would just nod along because you're young, charismatic, and good at social media. Maybe you thought that your millions of Twitter followers made you immune to scrutiny. His voice hardened. But here's the thing about reality, Congresswoman. It doesn't care about your Twitter followers. It doesn't care about your Instagram videos. It doesn't care about your performative outrage. Reality is stubborn, and the reality is that your record is a disaster. Kennedy slowly rose to his feet, which was an unusual move in a congressional hearing. The gesture commanded attention. "You killed 25,000 jobs in your own district and called it a victory," he said, his voice carrying through the silent room. "You live like the very elite that you demonize. You bought a Tesla after attacking Tesla. You shopped at Whole Foods after destroying the Amazon headquarters deal. You went to a $35,000 per ticket gala in a designer dress just to tell rich people they should pay more taxes." He took a step closer to his microphone. "You exaggerated your experience on January 6th. You slandered a police officer who was there protecting you. You used the language of sexual violence for political gain. You compared detention facilities to concentration camps. You staged photo ops in parking lots. You used your own grandmother's suffering as a political weapon." His voice grew stronger. "You proposed a $93 trillion spending plan with absolutely no way to pay for it. You want to eliminate air travel and even cattle. You want to provide economic security for people who are unwilling to work. You want to force 130 million buildings to be renovated in only 10 years, which is mathematically impossible. You want to eliminate 5 million jobs and just pretend they'll all become green jobs, with no plan for how that would actually happen." Kennedy paused, letting each accusation land. "You've misused taxpayer funds. You've violated ethics rules. You've accepted improper gifts. And when you're caught, you claim it was all just politically motivated, never taking responsibility for anything." He spread his hands. "And then, and this is my favorite part, even the Democratic Socialists of America, the very people who made you, withdrew their endorsement. You somehow managed to be too extreme for normal people, yet not extreme enough for the extremists. That takes a special kind of talent." Kennedy sat back down, but he kept his eyes locked on AOC. "You called me stupid, Congresswoman. You said, 'I probably think you can land on the sun if you go at night.' That's a cute line. Very quotable. I'm sure it'll do well on Twitter. But here's the truth. I'm not the one who thinks you can spend $93 trillion that we simply don't have. I'm not the one who drove away tens of thousands of jobs. I'm not the one who shops at Whole Foods while attacking Amazon. And I'm not the one who lives in luxury while preaching socialism." His voice dropped to something almost gentle. "You see, the difference between us isn't intelligence, Congresswoman. It's honesty. I don't pretend to be something I'm not. I'm a senator from Louisiana. I represent oil companies, chemical plants, and the working people who depend on those industries for their livelihoods. I don't apologize for that. I don't pretend I'm a revolutionary while living like an aristocrat." Kennedy picked up his yellow legal pad covered in notes. "But you pretend, you perform, you act, you tweet, and you convince yourself that the performance is the same as the reality. You think being popular online means that you're right. You think having millions of followers means you don't have to answer hard questions. You think outrage is a substitute for competence." He set the pad down. "And that is why your record is what it is. That's why you've accomplished nothing in Congress except for viral videos. That's why the only legislation with your name on it is a fantasy proposal that even your own party won't vote for. That's why you're a cautionary tale instead of a success story." Kennedy leaned into his microphone one final time. "The people of New York's 14th District deserve better than a TikTok star pretending to be a congresswoman. They deserve someone who will actually work for them instead of just performing for the cameras. They deserve someone who will create jobs instead of killing them. They deserve someone who will tell the truth instead of spinning narratives. He closed his folder with finality. They deserve better than you, Congresswoman, and I suspect they're starting to figure that out. Kennedy looked at the chairman. I have no further questions. The silence in the room was absolute. It lasted for 3 full seconds, an eternity in congressional hearings. Then chaos erupted. The gallery exploded with noise. Activists were shouting. Reporters were frantically typing or speaking urgently into their phones. Cameras were flashing everywhere. Later on, the C-SPAN feed showed the view count climbing so fast it looked just like a slot machine. AOC sat frozen at the witness table, her face a mask of fury and humiliation she could barely contain. Her lawyer was gently pulling at her arm, telling her it was time for them to leave. She finally stood, her chair scraping against the floor with an ugly, grating sound. This committee is a total sham, she said, her voice trembling. This is nothing but a partisan witch hunt, designed to intimidate and silence people. The Congresswoman is not recognized, Chairman Roberts said weakly. But AOC was already heading for the door. You want to know why people don't trust the government? She shouted as she walked, pointing back toward Kennedy. It's because of men exactly like him, who use their positions of power to bully and attack. The doors swung shut behind her, cutting off the rest of her words. The room erupted into chaos once again. Chairman Roberts was banging his gavel uselessly, trying to restore some sense of order. The other senators on the dais looked completely shell-shocked. The progressive activists in the gallery were chanting something, but their voices were drowned out by the general chaos. Kennedy, meanwhile, sat calmly in his seat, jotting down a few final notes on his legal pad. A young staffer leaned in to whisper something to him, but Kennedy simply shook his head. No statements, he said quietly. Let it speak for itself. Reporters were shouting questions at him, but he just ignored them. He carefully gathered his papers, stacked them in a neat pile, and placed them inside his worn leather briefcase. He stood up, buttoned his jacket, and began walking toward the door. Senator Kennedy, a reporter yelled out, do you have any comment on the Congresswoman's accusations? Kennedy paused at the doorway and turned back. His expression was mild, almost bemused. I believe I've said everything that needed to be said. The Congresswoman's record speaks for itself. Are you worried about backlash from progressives? Another reporter called out. Kennedy smiled his gentle, signature Louisiana smile. Son, I'm 74 years old. I stopped worrying about what people think of me right around the same time I stopped worrying about what to wear to parties. I just tell the truth as I see it, and folks can make up their own minds. One more question, a reporter shouted, just as Kennedy reached the door. Do you regret anything you said? Kennedy paused again, considering the question. Regret? No. But I do feel a little bit bad for the Congresswoman. She came in here thinking she was going to teach us all a lesson, and she ended up learning one herself instead. Now, that's never a pleasant experience, but sometimes it's necessary. He was almost out the door when a voice called out, Senator, was any of that personal? Kennedy turned back one final time. His expression was serious now, the folksy charm completely gone. No, sir, it wasn't personal. It was necessary. Someone needed to tell that young woman that Twitter isn't real life, that performance isn't governance, and that the American people deserve a whole lot better than sound bites and socialist fantasies. I guess that someone ended up being me. And with that, he was gone. Over the next 30 minutes, the hearing room slowly began to empty out. Staffers started gathering up papers. Security cleared out the gallery. Reporters hurried to file their stories, each one trying to perfectly capture the intense confrontation they had just witnessed. By the time the C-SPAN crew finished packing up their equipment, the video of the hearing had already hit 3 million views online. By midnight, that number would climb to 15 million. By the end of the week, it would become the most watched congressional hearing in over a decade. The very next morning, every single political talk show in America was leading with the story. Fox News ran the clip in its entirety, with commentary celebrating what they called Kennedy's epic takedown. CNN showed various clips, with their anchors debating whether or not the exchange was appropriate. MSNBC called it a misogynistic attack, while at the same time reluctantly acknowledging that Kennedy had actually raised some valid points. The New York Times ran a fact-check that confirmed most of Kennedy's claims were indeed accurate, even if his presentation was a bit theatrical. The Washington Post published an editorial that questioned AOC's overall effectiveness as a legislator. Even progressive outlets, like Jacobin, published pieces asking if AOC had somehow lost her way. In the weeks that followed, new polling showed AOC's approval rating dropping inside her own district for the very first time since her election. A credible primary challenger then announced their candidacy, citing the need for more substantive representation. The Democratic establishment also began to quietly distance themselves from her. But all of that was still yet to come. For now, back in the empty hearing room, a maintenance worker was sweeping up the debris left over from the chaos. Discarded coffee cups, dropped papers, and an "Attack the Rich" button that had fallen off someone's jacket. He found Kennedy's nameplate on the dais and carefully wiped it clean. Now that was really something, he muttered to himself, just shaking his head. That was really something. Outside in the hallway, as he headed toward his office, Kennedy's press secretary caught up with him. "Senator, you're getting interview requests from everyone," she said, scrolling through her phone. "Fox, CNN, MSNBC, the network podcasts, radio." "Decline them all," Kennedy said politely. "But sir, this could be," Kennedy interrupted gently. "I know what it could be. But I didn't do this for interviews or for attention. I did it because someone needed to, and no one else would. The work speaks for itself. Let it." They walked in silence for a moment. Then his press secretary quietly asked, "Do you really think she'll change?" Kennedy sighed. "Probably not. People rarely do, especially when changing would mean admitting they were wrong. But maybe, just maybe, some of her followers will think twice. Maybe some of the young people who idolize her will realize that charisma isn't the same as competence, that outrage doesn't equal solutions, and that Twitter fame isn't the same as actual accomplishment." He paused at his office door. If even a few people learned that lesson, then it was worth it. Inside his office, Kennedy set down his briefcase and walked to the window. The Capitol dome gleamed in the afternoon sun. He'd been coming to this building for years now, had sat through countless hearings, asked countless questions, and fought countless battles. This one had been different, not because it was particularly important in the grand scheme of things. Congress would keep functioning whether AOC changed or not. It was because sometimes someone had to stand up and say, "The emperor has no clothes. The revolutionary has no revolution. The socialist has no solutions." Someone had to speak the uncomfortable truth that everyone else was too polite or too scared to say. And today, that someone had been a 74-year-old senator from Louisiana with a country accent and a sharp mind. Kennedy smiled to himself, sat down at his desk, and got back to work. There were still bills to read, constituents to serve, and a country to help govern. The show was over. The work continued. 3 months later, on a quiet Saturday morning, Kennedy was having breakfast at a diner in Baton Rouge when a young woman approached his table. She was in her mid-20s, wearing a college sweatshirt. "Senator Kennedy?" she asked hesitantly. "That's me," he said, setting down his coffee. "Can I help you?" "I just wanted to say I watched your hearing with AOC. I've been following her for years. I thought she was amazing. I volunteered for her campaign. I defended her online constantly." Kennedy waited. "And after watching that hearing, after seeing you lay out everything she'd done and said, after checking the facts myself, I realized I'd been fooled. I'd been so caught up in the performance, in how inspiring she seemed, that I never actually looked at what she'd accomplished, or failed to accomplish." The young woman paused. "You made me realize that I need to care more about results than rhetoric, about substance than style, about truth over tribal loyalty. So, thank you." Kennedy stood and shook her hand. "Young lady, you just made my whole week. The fact that you were willing to question your assumptions, to check the facts, to think critically, that's what this country needs. Don't ever lose that." After she left, Kennedy's wife, who had been sitting across from him, raised an eyebrow. "Well, I guess it was worth it after all." Kennedy smiled. "I guess it was." He went back to his breakfast, a satisfied man. Outside, life went on. The sun shone, traffic moved, people went about their business, and in Washington, the show continued. But somewhere, a few people were thinking instead of just performing. And that, Senator John Kennedy figured, was a start.